Walter Jacobs stared at the microwave clock blinking 3 a.m. in the dim silence of his narrow kitchen, the same kitchen where he'd eaten toast with Carol every morning for 42 years before cancer turned routine into memory. He clutched her old ceramic coffee mug, faded red with a chipped rim and the words, "Today is a good day," barely visible, and held it like it still carried warmth, though he hadn't brewed a pot in days. The night creaked around him, quiet as a mausoleum. His legs ached. His breath felt shallow. The house, once full of noisy mornings and slammed doors and grandchildren laughing through cereal slurps, now felt more like a waiting room for something that never arrived. He'd tried to sleep. He'd tried the chamomile tea, the late-night radio. Nothing dulled the hum of regret. What was left? A collection of dusty model airplanes in the basement, an unfinished go-kart in the garage he and Jack never finished when Jack was 10, and a stack of unopened letters from the senior living community his daughter had been nudging him toward. "It's not giving up, Dad," she'd said, patting his hand. "It's just, simplifying." Walter didn't want simple. He wanted purpose. But at 70, wasn't that supposed to be gone? Wasn't he supposed to fade into quiet hobbies and lawn chairs and talking about the weather with strangers at the pharmacy? The TV flickered in the background, left on to make the house feel less empty. A late-night interview was playing, something on a streaming app his grandson had installed months ago. A clean-cut host sat across from Elon Musk. Walter had heard of the man, of course. Rockets. Cars. Space dreams. A kind of madness that didn't ask for permission. Walter almost reached for the remote, tired of watching young men talk about futures he wouldn't live to see. But then Elon leaned forward and said something that cut through the static of Walter's brain like a knife. "If something matters to you, never let age or fear stop you from building it." That was all. Simple. Not shouted. Not dramatic. But it landed like a jolt to the chest. Walter blinked. His hands clenched the mug a little tighter. Something in him twitched, not pain exactly, but a stirring he hadn't felt in years. He rewound it. Played it again. "If something matters to you, never let age or fear stop you from building it." Carol used to say things like that, in her own way. She believed in starting gardens late in summer. She once painted the hallway peach because she said it felt like light. She had believed in the possibility of more, even when everything else was telling her to settle for less. Walter placed the mug down gently. He walked to the garage, barefoot, not caring about the chill or the grit under his feet. The motion sensor light flickered on, revealing the old go-kart, covered in a canvas tarp, rust lining the corners, one wheel missing. They were going to race it in the neighborhood derby when Jack was 10. Life got busy. Then Jack got older. Then Carol got sick. Then everything stopped. Walter pulled off the tarp. Dust exploded into the air, dancing in the cold fluorescence. He ran his fingers over the frame. It had his handwriting on it, faded but still there, Rocket Cart Project. Jack had laughed when he wrote it. "We're not actually putting rockets on it, Dad." But they'd tried. In their heads, anyway. Walter opened a cracked plastic bin nearby. Inside were sketches, napkins, yellowed papers, even a few with Carol's cursive scribbled encouragements. "Looks fast already. Don't forget the helmet." A strange pressure built behind his eyes. He hadn't cried in years. Hadn't let himself. But now, standing here in bare feet and memories, with Elon Musk's voice echoing in his skull, something broke loose. Not sadness. Not even grief. Something closer to frustration. Not at others, at himself. At the time he'd wasted not trying. He thought of his grandson, Sam, always hunched over a screen, building things with code that Walter didn't understand. Maybe the boy would get it. Maybe not. But Walter knew this, he wasn't done. Not yet. He went back inside, got a pen and notepad from the drawer, and wrote down Musk's words. Then, under it, he wrote, finish the go-kart. The next morning came cold and gray. Walter didn't sleep. He didn't want to. He went to the hardware store in town, the one where the young clerks assumed he was shopping for grandkids. Building something, one of them asked, smiling like Walter had just stepped off the nostalgia train. Walter nodded. Something I should have finished a long time ago. He left with tools, parts, and a bag of screws he wasn't sure he needed. Back home, he changed into his old work clothes, frayed jeans, a flannel shirt that smelled of oil and time. He opened the garage wide and got to work. His hands shook at first. The wrench felt heavier than it used to. The cold bit deeper into his joints. But the frame responded. Bolts turned. The metal sang under pressure. Walter grunted through it, muscles groaning, heart pounding with something that wasn't fear this time, it was urgency. His phone buzzed once. It was his daughter, texting to remind him about a luncheon at the senior center. He ignored it. Time wasn't going to wait for permission. As he tightened a bolt, he whispered, never let age or fear stop you. That night, after a long bath and some aspirin, Walter replayed the interview again. He wasn't looking for a sign. He'd already gotten one. He just wanted to hear the words again, to anchor himself to the reason he'd woken up. As Elon's voice filled the room, Walter felt something stirring, not just hope, but rebellion. He didn't want a legacy made of photos and dusty belongings. He wanted something alive, something that moved. Maybe it wouldn't fly. Maybe no one would care. But he would. He already did. Somewhere out there, someone like him might be watching, wondering if it was too late. It wasn't. It never was. The world may not be built for 70-year-old dreamers, but that didn't mean they had to stop dreaming. Walter closed his eyes and saw the go-kart, flying down the old neighborhood hill, wind in Jack's hair, Carol clapping from the porch. Not memory. A vision. A plan. He would finish what he started. Not because it would make him young again, but because it would make him matter again. He picked up the mug, filled it with coffee this time, and sat by the window as dawn broke through the trees like a promise. He didn't say a word. He didn't need to. The fire was lit. He wasn't fading anymore. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Walter Jacobs had always believed in fixing things. A man of calloused hands and a quiet voice, he had spent most of his adult life with his head under hoods, his knees on garage floors, and his heart inside machines that no one else wanted to deal with. He wasn't famous in his small Iowa town, but he was remembered, a little. The kind of man people waved to from their trucks without knowing why. He was the one who could fix a weed whacker in 30 minutes, who patched a neighbor's leaky sink without charging a dime, who once helped get a rusted-out Dodge back on the road just because the teenage owner reminded him of Jack. And yet, even with that history of usefulness, the present had a way of making it all feel irrelevant. Retirement came with silence. The phone didn't ring like it used to. The neighbors moved. The old shop closed down and was replaced by a vape store. His body slowed down more than he expected. The mornings took longer to get through. His knees ached when it rained. His hands, once steady as rulers, had started to betray him with tiny tremors. But the hardest part wasn't the aging, it was the absence. The absence of being needed, the absence of laughter bouncing off the kitchen tiles, the absence of Carol humming while she watered her herbs in the window. She had been the melody of his life, her presence softening every edge. Her illness came fast, a wildfire disguised as fatigue. By the time they got the diagnosis, the clock was already ticking. She was gone within 8 months. Walter remembered the last thing she said before she slipped away, "Don't forget to finish something for you, okay?" At the time, he didn't understand it. Finish what? The garden? The hallway paint job? Their taxes? He nodded like he always did, thinking he'd figure it out later. But later never came. After the funeral, the world got smaller. Jack flew in from Denver with his family, stayed a few days, made the usual promises to call more often. Jack had grown into a responsible man, a financial advisor with polished shoes, thinning hair, and a distracted smile. They weren't close anymore. Not since Jack was a teenager and Walter, in trying to teach discipline, had pushed too hard. They had never quite repaired that bridge. Jack's own son, Sam, was polite and quiet, thumbs glued to a screen, eyes never quite meeting Walter's. Carol had always been the bridge between generations. Without her, the visits turned brief and uncomfortable, filled with small talk and longer silences. Walter didn't blame them. He didn't know how to connect anymore, either. After they left, the house returned to stillness. He tried hobbies. Crossword puzzles. Jigsaw puzzles. TV reruns. He even tried painting once. Got as far as buying a canvas and some brushes, then lost interest before opening them. The only thing he kept going was the morning walk to the mailbox and his evening tea, staring out the back window at the overgrown lawn. Once, a squirrel built a nest in Carol's planter box. That was the most excitement he'd had in a week. What truly haunted him wasn't the loneliness, it was the sense that he'd been waiting for something, and now he'd missed it. He thought about the go-kart sometimes. Jack had drawn it on loose-leaf paper at the kitchen table, a childish fantasy of engines and wings. Walter had promised they'd build it together. They started, too, scavenged parts, assembled a frame. But life intervened. Work got busy. Jack grew up. Carol got sick. Walter never admitted it, but the half-built frame in the garage became a monument to every lost moment he'd convinced himself he'd return to later. He kept the blueprint, though. It was taped to the wall in the garage, yellowing around the edges, with Jack's crooked handwriting and Walter's careful measurements. Sometimes he'd go out there just to stare at it. Not to build, just to remember. The memory that came back most wasn't dramatic. It was a Saturday. Jack was 10. The garage smelled of grease and coffee. Carol had brought them sandwiches, one hand on her hip, laughing as she watched Jack sit inside the frame pretending to steer. "We're going to fly this thing to the moon," Jack had said. "Only if we finish it first," Walter replied. "We will," Jack said, with that wild certainty only kids had. He never let himself forget that moment. It was frozen in his mind like an old Polaroid, yellow, soft, warm. And yet, for years afterward, he'd done nothing with it. He told himself it was fine. He'd lived a good life. He raised a family. Paid his bills. Did his duty. That should have been enough. But deep down, he knew he'd buried something. Not just the go-kart or the dreams it symbolized, but a part of himself. The part that once got excited by the hum of possibility. The part that once believed he could make anything. He didn't hate aging. He hated irrelevance. At a routine physical, his doctor asked about memory issues. He was told he had mild cognitive decline. Nothing serious. Just something to monitor. The doctor gave him a pamphlet about mental stimulation, brain games, community programs. Walter took it and never opened it. It felt like a death sentence written in Comic Sans. "Maybe it's time to slow down," the doctor had said kindly. Walter had nodded. But inside, a voice whispered, "What if slowing down isn't what I need?" His daughter, Liz, visited a week later. She brought brochures. Retirement villages. Assisted living. "Just in case," she said. "They have woodworking classes, Dad. You could meet people." Meet people. As if loneliness was just about proximity. As if friends could be assigned like chores. Walter smiled. Told her he'd think about it. But that night, sitting alone with Carol's mug in his hands, He felt something dark bloom in his chest. He wasn't afraid of dying. He was afraid of disappearing before he died. That's what aging felt like. Not just aches and slower movements, but being erased in slow motion. Ads weren't for him. Stores weren't for him. Even his own son talked to him like a well-meaning caregiver. "You okay, Dad? Need anything, Dad?" Never, "What are you working on, Dad?" or "What are you dreaming about?" Because no one believed he was still becoming something. That was the painful part. The assumption that he had nothing left to offer. That his time had passed. And then came the night. The TV. The voice. The words. Elon Musk, sitting casually on a stage, talking about dreams and fear and the nonsense of limitations. And that sentence, clean and electric, slicing through Walter's fog like sunlight through dusty blinds: "If something matters to you, never let age or fear stop you from building it." He couldn't stop thinking about it. It replayed in his head like a broken record, except it didn't feel broken. It felt new. Like oxygen. He stayed up the whole night after that, going through old boxes, opening notebooks he hadn't touched in years. Diagrams. Notes. Scribbles. Carol's encouragement in the margins. A list titled "Things to Build Someday." It read: solar mower. Remote-controlled boat. Jack's cart. Carol's herb stand. Engine-powered kite. Each item was like a breadcrumb back to the man he used to be. Not the tired widower. Not the forgotten neighbor. But the builder. The dreamer. The dad who once believed in moonshots with his 10-year-old son. And for the first time in years, Walter felt something shift inside him, not a memory, not a ghost, but a decision. It was quiet. It didn't shout. But it was steady and immovable. He would finish the go-kart. Not for glory. Not for the world. For him. For Carol. For Jack. For the boy he used to be. Because maybe, just maybe, it wasn't too late. Not to matter. Not to start. Not to build something. Even now. The waiting room smelled like disinfectant and coffee left on a burner too long, the kind of scent that settles into the vinyl chairs and lives there forever. Walter sat stiffly, flipping through a 3-month-old issue of Popular Mechanics, pretending to read an article about hydrogen engines while his mind drifted. Across from him, a young mother scrolled through her phone while her toddler babbled nonsense to a stuffed giraffe. The receptionist called names, one after another, and time passed like cold syrup. Walter didn't want to be here. He never liked doctor visits, too many bright lights and probing questions and the gentle condescension wrapped in sterile smiles. But his daughter Liz had insisted. "It's just a checkup, Dad," she'd said over the phone. "You haven't had one in over a year. Let's just make sure everything's okay." He didn't want her worrying, so he agreed. Now, sitting in the chilled air, he regretted it. He didn't feel sick. He felt tired. There was a difference. A nurse finally called his name, and he stood with a quiet groan, his knees clicking like old floorboards. The hallway was narrow, the walls decorated with framed posters of hearts and lungs and smiling families jogging through sunshine. He sat on the paper-covered exam table while the nurse took his vitals, asked the same questions they always asked: any pain? Any falls? Any changes in mood? He answered with the same shrugs and head shakes he always gave. Then the nurse left, and Dr. Raymond entered. He was younger than Walter expected, 40, maybe, with gelled hair and a voice that tried too hard to be casual. "Good to see you, Mr. Jacobs. Let's take a look, shall we?" The exam was routine. Blood pressure, reflexes, stethoscope taps. Then came the questions. Any memory issues lately? Misplacing things? Trouble recalling names or dates? Walter hesitated. He had been forgetting things. Not big things, just things. He'd lost his keys last week and found them in the freezer. He'd called Jack Tom once, which was strange because he didn't even know a Tom. But was that memory loss or just being 70? He answered carefully. I forget stuff sometimes. Doesn't everybody? Dar. Raymond smiled the way people smile at kids who lie about brushing their teeth. That's normal, yes. But let's run a quick cognitive assessment just to be safe. Walter nodded, heart sinking. He hated these tests. They felt like traps dressed as puzzles. The doctor asked him to remember 3 words: apple, penny, table. Then had him count backwards from 100 by sevens. He did okay, stumbling once but catching himself. Then came the clock drawing. He had to draw a clock with the hand set at 10 past 11. His hand trembled slightly, not enough to matter, but enough to notice. He finished, set the pen down, folded his hands. Dr. Raymond glanced over it, jotted some notes, and said, "It's nothing to worry about yet, but you're showing some early signs of mild cognitive impairment. That's common for your age, and it doesn't mean it's going to progress into anything serious, but we want to keep an eye on it." Walter nodded slowly. "So what do I do?" The doctor leaned forward. Stay physically active. Engage in mentally stimulating activities, puzzles, reading, learning new skills. Social interaction helps. Also, make sure you're sleeping well and managing stress. Walter didn't say anything. He just nodded again. The word impairment echoed in his head like a hammer in an empty room. On the way out, the nurse handed him a pamphlet titled Living Well with MCI. It had smiling seniors playing checkers and doing Tai Chi in a park. He thanked her politely and tossed it into the passenger seat of his truck. The ride home was quiet. The radio was off. He didn't want music or talk or commercials asking if he was tired of struggling with memory loss. He was tired of being treated like a box slowly losing its labels. Back at the house, he parked the truck and sat in the driveway for a moment, staring at the garage door. He imagined what was behind it, the go-kart, the dust, the plans. Something inside him stirred, but the diagnosis pressed down like a weighted blanket. What if this was the beginning of the end? What if he really was fading? He remembered the last few months, how he'd struggled to finish crosswords he used to breeze through, how Carol's birthday had snuck up on him without a warning bell, how sometimes he'd open the fridge and forget what he wanted. And now a doctor had confirmed it. A mild cognitive impairment. A gentle phrase for a quiet vanishing. That night, he sat in the living room with the TV off and the room lit only by the flicker of the fireplace. He held the pamphlet in his lap but didn't open it. Instead, he looked at the sticky note he'd written a few nights ago: "Finish the go-kart." He hadn't thrown it away. He couldn't. It had weight now, more than a to-do item. It was a lifeline. A declaration. He pulled out his phone and opened YouTube. Searched for the Elon Musk interview. He watched the clip again. If something matters to you, never let age or fear stop you from building it. He said it aloud this time, like a vow. His voice cracked at the end. He didn't want to be a statistic. He didn't want to shrink into brochures and waiting rooms and polite conversations about slowing down. He wanted to build. To make. To finish. Because the part of his mind that still worked, and it did still work, was the part that came alive when he used it. When he dreamed. When he planned. When he created. He remembered something Carol once told him during a long night on the porch. "You're always happiest when your hands are busy and your mind is racing." She wasn't wrong. The worst days since she passed hadn't been the lonely ones. They were the idle ones. The days where he did nothing. Thought nothing. Made nothing. And if what the doctor said was true, that his brain needed stimulation, needed challenges, then what better medicine than the very thing he'd been putting off for 30 years? The go-kart wasn't just a project. It was a portal back to relevance. It was a way to fight back. To prove that he still had it. Maybe not all of it, not like when he was 40. But enough. Enough to try. Enough to show his grandson that 70 didn't mean surrender. Enough to remind his son that he was still the same man who once built Jack a treehouse with nothing but a hammer, a hacksaw, and a stubborn streak a mile long. Walter stood slowly, bones cracking like fireworks. He walked to the garage. Opened it. The cold hit him, sharp and immediate, but he didn't flinch. He turned on the overhead light. The cart frame glinted like it had been waiting for him. He reached up and pulled down the old blueprint still taped to the wall. Jack's scrawl. His own notes. Carol's little smiley face in the corner. "We will." He whispered the words like a promise. Then he cleared the workbench. Pulled out the old toolbox. Laid everything out with precision. He wasn't going to let some doctor's diagnosis define what was left of his life. He'd play their memory games, sure. He'd take the vitamins, do the walks, drink the water. But most of all, he was going to build. Because nothing sharpened the mind like purpose. Nothing strengthened the spirit like doing something that scared you just enough to feel alive. And right now, as the wind howled outside and the night folded itself around his little house, Walter Jacobs felt more alive than he had in years. He whispered again, louder this time, "If something matters to you, never let age or fear stop you from building it." Then he picked up the first wrench and got to work. The garage door creaked open slowly, stiff on its hinges from years of disuse, revealing the familiar shapes of the past beneath layers of dust, rust, and forgotten intention. Walter stepped in like he was entering a chapel, not a workspace, the cold cement floor pressing through his slippers, the air stale with oil, rubber, and memory. The single overhead bulb flickered once before casting its uneven yellow light across the workbench, the scattered tools, and in the far corner, the go-kart frame draped in its old canvas sheet. He moved toward it slowly, heart steady but full, each footstep echoing like a drumbeat in a room meant to be loud again. He stood before the covered machine, his hands hesitating in the air for a moment before gripping the fabric and peeling it away in one motion. Dust puffed into the air, catching the light like a snowstorm, revealing the skeleton of possibility, for metal bars welded into a crude shape, a rusted steering column, a missing seat and tires deflated but intact. It was both more broken and more beautiful than he remembered. He ran his hand over the side rail, his fingers tracing the initials carved faintly near the back, J+W, scratched into the metal with a screwdriver decades ago. Jack had done it when Walter wasn't looking, proud and mischievous. At the time, Walter had pretended to be annoyed, but he'd never painted over it. That mark meant something. It still did. The old workbench still had his labeled jars of screws and bolts, though many of the labels had faded or peeled. His tools lay scattered and rust-spotted but not beyond salvation. A cracked plastic bin sat underneath, filled with pieces they'd never installed, scrap metal, wiring, a seatbelt Walter had salvaged from a junked sedan. He pulled out the blueprint again, careful with the aging paper, and pinned it to the corkboard above the bench. The lines were simple, childlike even, but full of energy, ambition, belief. He remembered Jack explaining every part, hands waving in excitement. "This lever will make it turn left, maybe. And here's where we add the turbo button. Just in case." Walter had chuckled and said, "Let's get it to roll first, buddy." Now, 3 decades later, he studied the same drawing, only now it felt like a map back to something he thought was lost. He didn't start working right away. He didn't rush. He just stood there, absorbing it all, letting the past wash over him in waves, Carol calling from the doorway, Jack's laughter echoing through the open garage, summer light spilling in, the buzz of cicadas outside, the promise of what they were building. It had never been about the cart, not really. It had been about time spent. About effort. About dreaming together. About creating something that existed nowhere else but here, between father and son, bolt by bolt, wire by wire. That was what this frame held. It wasn't just steel and rubber. It was relationship, paused in time. Walter finally picked up a rag and wiped the dust from the seat bracket, then the steering column, then the wheels. He moved slowly, carefully, like an archaeologist unearthing a relic, knowing that every piece had a story. He sorted through the bin, cataloging what was missing. One of the rear wheels was misaligned. The battery, if it could even be called that anymore, was bloated and useless. The frame was solid, but the wiring needed to be completely redone. He made a list on a scrap of cardboard: battery, rear axle bolt, seat frame, wheel lugs, brake lever, chain tensioner. The act of writing the list alone made him feel younger, more alert. This wasn't fantasy anymore. It was project. It had goals, tasks, obstacles. It gave shape to his days. And that alone was enough to pull him forward. The next morning, he woke up before the sun and made himself a cup of black coffee, the first in weeks. He skipped the crossword and skipped the news and walked straight to the garage. The smell greeted him like an old friend. The air was still cold, but he didn't feel it as much. He rolled up the garage door, letting morning light in, and began organizing tools. He took a wire brush to the rusted socket wrenches, set up the old battery charger just in case, and laid out the remaining parts like pieces of a sacred ritual. Every motion felt good, grounding. He wasn't fast, but he was steady. And when his hand trembled, he didn't get frustrated. He just paused. Adjusted. Continued. Around noon, he drove into town. The hardware store was the same one he'd taken Jack to when they were building the cart the first time. Back then, Jack would run through the aisles, touching everything, asking questions. Walter used to gently scold him for being too curious. Now, he missed those interruptions. He missed the sound of someone sharing his interest. At the counter, a young man with a backward cap and a nose ring asked, "Working on something fun?" Walter considered the answer, then smiled. "Finishing something that should have been done a long time ago." The clerk grinned. "That sounds like a story." Walter just nodded and paid for his parts. On the way home, he passed the park where he and Carol used to take Jack on Sundays. The swings were empty, the old slide replaced by some bright new contraption. Time didn't wait, not for anything. But maybe it didn't have to erase everything either. Maybe some things could be rebuilt. At home, he brought the new battery into the garage and tested the terminals. The first spark jumped, and he smiled despite himself. That little jolt, that crackle of electricity, it wasn't much, but it was proof that something still worked. He mounted the new battery and adjusted the wiring carefully. It took all afternoon. When he finally flipped the switch, the starter motor whirred quietly before dying. Not enough juice. He nodded, as if the cart had spoken back. "We'll try again tomorrow." That night, his hands were sore, and his back ached, but his mind was sharper than it had been in months. He skipped dinner and instead sat at the kitchen table drawing new plans on the back of old envelopes. If he modified the throttle cable, it might give better tension. If he repositioned the seat bracket, it could lower the center of gravity. These were things he hadn't thought about in decades, but the knowledge was still there, like muscle memory buried under years of silence. Around midnight, he stood by the garage again, just looking. The light inside was still on, spilling out onto the driveway. He thought about Carol. What she'd say if she saw him now. She'd probably shake her head and say, "You're going to throw your back out again." But her eyes would smile. She'd get it. She always got it. The next morning brought something unexpected. A voice. "What are you building?" Walter turned and saw a boy standing on the sidewalk. 10 or 11, holding a skateboard, eyes curious. Walter hesitated, then said, "It's a go-kart." The boy squinted. "Like a real one?" "A real one," Walter replied. "Well, it will be, if I can get the brakes to stop sticking. The boy stepped closer. That's cool. He didn't say anything else. Just watched. Walter didn't mind. He liked the company. The boy didn't stay long. Just nodded once, then said, "Good luck, mister," and skated away. Walter smiled. Word might get around. That was okay. Maybe more people would ask. Maybe not. But even that brief moment, a stranger curious about what he was making, was enough to remind him that this wasn't just a private thing. It could be shared. It should be. The next few days were filled with small victories. He aligned the rear axle, installed a new brake lever, and got the steering column to turn without grinding. On Thursday, he sat in the frame for the first time in decades. It groaned under his weight, but it held. He grabbed the wheel and closed his eyes. The sounds came back. Jack's laughter. Carol's voice. The hum of summer. The smell of gasoline and lemonade. He wasn't just finishing a machine. He was unearthing a life. He whispered, almost there, to the empty garage. The cart didn't reply, but he didn't need it to. The echoes were already answering. The next morning, Walter woke to the sound of wind scratching against the window and a dull ache in his hips. For a few seconds, he lay there, staring at the ceiling, his hands folded across his chest like he was trying to keep his ribs from falling apart. The light filtering through the curtains was pale and heavy with the mood of late November. The kind of morning that made you think twice about getting up at all. But the garage was calling. The cart wasn't done. His body creaked like an old ship as he swung his legs over the side of the bed. Each movement felt slower than the last. As he dressed, he caught his reflection in the mirror. White hair sticking up in odd directions, liver spots on his hands, his shoulders slouched as though someone had been stacking bricks on them for years. He muttered to himself, "You look like hell," but there was no real anger in it. Just observation. Just truth. At breakfast, he fumbled the spoon. It clattered onto the tile, splattering oatmeal against the cabinets. He froze. The sound of the metal hitting the floor rang louder than it should have, as if the kitchen itself were shouting at him. He bent down slowly, reached for it, and then couldn't remember what he'd meant to do next. It was like his mind had gone blank mid-thought, a window that suddenly fogged up from the inside. He stood there, spoon in hand, heart pounding. Was it the diagnosis catching up to him? Was this it, the beginning of the real slide? He stood up, left the spoon in the sink, and walked to the garage. He needed something to ground him. Something to do. But when he reached the workbench, his hands didn't feel like his own. The tools were too small, the bolts too slippery. He dropped a wrench, cursed softly, then picked it up and tried again. He couldn't focus. The previous day's clarity was gone, replaced by something darker. Doubt. Not the kind that asks polite questions, but the kind that creeps in through the cracks and stays quiet just long enough to make you trust it. What if I can't finish it? What if I'm just playing a part one no longer remember how to perform? What if Jack was right to keep his distance? What if this card is just an old man's fantasy wrapped in rust and delusion? He sat down hard on the old shop stool. The cold metal pressed through his jeans. The cart loomed in front of him, not as a project, but as a mirror. It showed him everything he hadn't done, everything he'd left unfinished, not just in steel and bolts, but in life. The unsaid things with Jack. The missed years with Sam. The promises he'd made to Carol that he thought he had time to keep. For a long moment, Walter just sat there. The garage, so full of noise in his memory, felt like a tomb. And that's when the real war started, not with his hands, or his body, but in his mind. It whispered cruel truths. You're 70. You forget things. Your son doesn't visit. Your wife is gone. You're not building anything. You're just pretending you still matter. He tried to argue back, but the silence gave no ground. It swallowed every counterpoint. He picked up the blueprint again, stared at the childish handwriting, and for the first time since starting this whole thing, he almost threw it away. But then something else happened. Not dramatic. Not thunder or fire. Just a notification. His phone buzzed. A video suggestion from YouTube. Probably more interview clips, more algorithms feeding him pieces of the same message. He almost ignored it. But something about the title stopped him. Elon Musk on doing it anyway. He clicked. Musk was seated in some dark studio, speaking not to an interviewer, but to the camera. The words weren't particularly new, but the tone was. It wasn't about success. It was about resistance. About the days you want to quit. Most people think the hardest part of doing something big is starting, Musk said. But the truth is, the hardest part is showing up on the days you feel like a fraud. The days your brain lies to you. The days your past tells you you're not worthy of a future. Those are the days you do it anyway. Walter stared at the screen, barely blinking. Musk continued, if you're waiting to feel ready, you'll never move. If you're waiting to feel worthy, you'll never build. You don't need permission. You need motion. Walter let the screen go dark. The garage felt different now. No brighter, no warmer, but the weight of self-pity was loosening. He stood again, this time slowly, deliberately. Picked up the wrench. Turned a bolt. It was stiff, but it moved. He adjusted the brake lever. Aligned the chain. One task at a time. Not trying to finish, just trying to begin again. Each movement was a rebellion against the voice in his head that said he was too old. Too broken. Too far gone. He worked until the sun hit the windows, then took a break and ate something simple. When he returned, he brought a chair and sat next to the cart, not to work, just to be with it. To keep showing up. That night, Liz called. He thought about letting it go to voicemail, but answered. "Hey, Dad," she said, cheerful but cautious. "Just checking in." "I'm building something," he replied. "Oh. What kind of something?" "The go-kart," he said. "The one Jack and I started. I pulled it out of the garage." There was a pause. "Wow," she said. "That's unexpected." "It's not going fast," he admitted. "Some days I don't remember where I left the damn screwdriver. But I'm doing it anyway." Liz didn't respond right away. Then she said, "I think Mom would have loved that." He swallowed hard. "Yeah. I think so too." They talked a little longer. Not about memory or doctors or pamphlets. Just about the project. And when he hung up, he felt lighter. Not healed. But lifted. A few days later, Jack texted. Just a simple message, "Heard you're back at it. Cart still have the rocket boosters?" Walter stared at the screen for a long time. Then typed back, "Only on Tuesdays." They didn't say much else, but it was something. A bridge, maybe. Or the start of one. And so, Walter kept showing up. Not every day was good. Some mornings he couldn't focus. Some nights he questioned the point. But he did it anyway. Because somewhere inside him, deeper than fear, deeper than memory loss, deeper even than grief, was the same thing that had always driven him, the need to make, to mend, to matter. He didn't need to finish it for the world. Just for himself. Because what the world had forgotten, he was starting to remember, that relevance isn't something you're given. It's something you build. One bolt, one call, one act of stubborn hope at a time. The sound of the engine sputtering to life was barely more than a cough, half metallic, half defiant, but it echoed through the garage like a war cry. Walter stood over the go-kart, hands still gripping the worn steering wheel, eyes wide, heart pounding harder than it had in weeks. The engine didn't stay on, cut out after 4 seconds, but it had started. After all the trial and error, the rewiring, the replaced battery, and hours spent crawling under the frame with a flashlight clenched between his teeth, something had finally clicked. He stepped back, wiped his hands on an old rag, and let out a laugh, dry and wheezy, but real. Not the kind you give people when they ask how you're doing, but the kind that escapes before you can think. Progress. That tiny burst of ignition gave him more energy than a pot of coffee. He checked the wiring again, adjusted the throttle cable, and rewound the starter motor. It didn't crank this time, but that was fine. He knew where to start again. What to check. What to fix. It was his again. That night, feeling bold and slightly reckless, Walter snapped a photo of the go-kart, half-finished, cluttered garage in the background, blueprint hanging crooked behind it, and posted it on his barely used Facebook page. The caption read, 30 years late, but the kart project lives. Never too old to finish what you start. He didn't expect much. Maybe a pity like from Liz, maybe a thumbs up from someone he hadn't seen since the 80s. But the next morning, something unexpected happened. His post had been shared. Not once or twice, over 24 times. There were comments from people he barely remembered, people from the neighborhood, friends of Jack's, even a few strangers. Some said things like, inspiring, and, my dad would have loved this. One simply wrote, I needed to see this today. Liz messaged him later that afternoon. Dad. You're kinda going viral. Did you see what Jack posted? Walter hadn't. He logged back in and saw that Jack had shared the post to his own page with a caption that hit harder than Walter expected. This was a project my dad and I started when I was a kid. We never finished it. Life got in the way. I always figured it was too late. But apparently, he didn't. Jack hadn't said much else, but the photo said enough, his caption underneath Walter's original picture. And the comments kept rolling in. People tagging their parents. Others sharing their own, unfinished, stories, half-built boats, novels, treehouses, garage bands. It was as if Walter's quiet little rebellion against time had struck a chord in people who had stopped listening for their own. The garage suddenly felt less like a cave and more like a stage. But it wasn't ego he felt rising, it was responsibility. He hadn't meant to inspire anyone. He wasn't even sure what he was doing most days. But now he had to finish. Because someone, somewhere, might be watching and thinking, if he can do it, maybe I can too. It changed the work. Gave it weight and purpose. And still, it was never about showing off. It was about proving wrong the quiet voices that crept in every time he forgot where he put his screwdriver or every time he had to stop and rest his knees. He started filming short clips of his progress. Not fancy. Just 30-second videos on his phone. Today I cleaned the carburetor. Took me all morning, but we're getting there. Replaced the rear axle bolt, my back may never forgive me. Got her to roll 5 feet under power. 5 feet. Who says 70 can't move things forward? Liz helped him set up a simple Instagram account called @Grandpa Builds. Trust me, Dad, she'd said, people eat this stuff up. It's not just about the cart, it's the journey. At first, he laughed it off. But the account grew. Slowly. Then faster. Comments started coming in from people he'd never met. My dad died before we ever got to finish our fishing boat. Watching you work makes me feel like I'm getting a second chance. Another said, I'm 67, just started learning piano. This page is like fuel for me. One person wrote, dude, this guy is the real Elon Musk of grandpas. Walter didn't know how to take that. He chuckled when he read it. Then saved the comment anyway. The irony wasn't lost on him. The man who had once dismissed all social media as vanity nonsense, was now uploading videos of himself turning bolts and wiping grease from his forearms. And yet, it didn't feel vain. It felt vital. Like he was part of something bigger than himself. The next time the engine turned over and ran for 15 seconds, he posted the video with the caption, 15 seconds of motion after 30 years of stillness. What's something you gave up on that still calls to you? Comments poured in. Hundreds. People didn't just watch, they responded. Some tagged their kids. Others dusted off their own half-done projects. One woman in Texas started building birdhouses with her grandson. A man in Vermont pulled out his late wife's sketchbook and began painting again. And each message Walter read sank deeper into his chest, cracking open something he hadn't realized had closed off after Carol died. Connection. Contribution. Relevance. One evening, while reviewing comments, he noticed a private message from someone with a verified account badge. He almost deleted it, thinking it was spam. But then he saw the name, Eva Chen, a podcast producer for a motivational show called Reignite. She wrote, "Hi Walter, I've been following your story and would love to feature you on our next episode. Our audience is full of people looking for second chances. Your story is one." Walter stared at the message for a long time. He'd listened to Reignite once or twice, mostly when Liz insisted. It was all about transformation, mindset, rediscovery. Hosted by some 30-something life coach with perfect teeth and a million listeners. What would he even say on a podcast like that? He wasn't trying to sell hope. He was just trying to finish a go-kart. He didn't reply right away. Instead, he called Liz. She picked up on the second ring. "Hey, Dad. Everything okay? A woman wants me on a podcast." Silence. Then, "Wait, what?" He explained. She gasped. "Dad. That's incredible. You have to do it." "I don't know," he said slowly. "Feels like I'd be pretending to be something I'm not." "You're not pretending. You're living it. People need to hear from someone who's not polished, not perfect. Just real." The next day, he said yes. They recorded the episode remotely. Walter sat at his kitchen table, wearing his nicest flannel, earbuds in, holding a mug of lukewarm coffee like it was a security blanket. The host asked questions about his age, about memory loss, about grief, about the go-kart, about Jack, about Carol, about what kept him going. Walter didn't sugarcoat anything. He talked about the day he stood in the garage and felt like a ghost. He talked about the spoon on the kitchen floor. He quoted Elon Musk, "If something matters to you, never let age or fear stop you from building it." At the end, the host asked, "What do you want people to take away from your story?" Walter thought for a long time. Then he said, "I want them to know that the light doesn't go out unless you let it. That fading isn't a requirement. It's a choice. You don't need to do something grand. You just need to do something. Anything. And keep doing it until your hands remember why they were made." The episode aired 2 days later. By the following week, the account had over 100,000 followers. Walter didn't care about the numbers. But he did care when Jack called. "Dad," Jack said slowly, voice thick with something between awe and hesitation. "I listened to the podcast." Walter held his breath. "Yeah. I didn't know you felt that way. About me. About everything." Walter's throat tightened. "I didn't either. Until I started building again." Jack was quiet. Then he said, "Sam's been watching your videos. He wants to come help next weekend. If that's okay." Walter closed his eyes. That'd be more than okay. When they hung up, Walter walked to the garage. The cart gleamed under the fluorescent light, humble but defiant. Not done yet. Not even close. But moving. Alive. And now, shared. What started as a private act of defiance had become a signal flare. To others. To himself. To the world. A small spark, gone public. The morning Sam arrived was overcast but strangely warm for late fall, the kind of day that felt like it couldn't quite make up its mind between seasons. Walter stood in the driveway in his patched flannel shirt, waiting, hands shoved deep into his coat pockets, heart thumping like it hadn't since Jack was a boy himself. Every few seconds, he glanced down the street, trying not to let his nerves get the best of him. The driveway had been swept. The garage had been cleaned. The cart sat under a fresh tarp, not because he wanted to hide it, but because he wanted Sam to see it unveiled, to feel the same jolt of potential Walter had felt when he'd first pulled the sheet off weeks ago. At 10:14 a.m., a navy blue Subaru pulled into the driveway, gravel crunching under the tires. The door opened, and Sam stepped out, tall and lanky, his hoodie sleeves bunched at the elbows, backpack slung over one shoulder. He looked exactly like Jack at that age, and not at all like Jack. That strange paradox of generations. Walter waved awkwardly. Sam offered a shy smile and said, "Hey, Grandpa." Walter cleared his throat. "You got taller since summer." "Dad says I'm all knees now," Sam replied. They stood there for a moment, letting the silence stretch just long enough to be noticed but not uncomfortable. Then Walter gestured toward the garage. "You ready to see what we're working on?" Sam's eyes lit up. "Definitely." Walter led him inside, heart pounding. He paused in front of the cart, then pulled off the tarp with a theatrical flair he didn't know he still had in him. Sam gasped, not out of politeness but genuine wonder. "Whoa," he said, stepping forward. "Is that the one? The one from the pictures?" "Same frame," Walter nodded. "Same bolts in the wheels. Different battery. Better throttle. But it's the one." Sam walked around it slowly, like he was circling an animal that might spring to life at any second. "This is amazing." Walter grinned. "She still needs a lot of work. But she's already done more than I ever expected." Sam looked up. "Can I help?" "That's why you're here," Walter said. They started small. Walter showed Sam how to check the tire pressure, how to identify a stripped screw, how to read the hand-drawn wiring diagram taped to the wall. Sam was a quick learner, curious, careful, unafraid to ask questions. Walter tried not to let emotion choke him, but it was hard not to see Jack's younger face reflected in the way Sam held a wrench, or the way his brow furrowed when something didn't quite fit. By noon, they were both grease-smudged and smiling. They broke for lunch, eating sandwiches on the porch. Sam talked about school, how boring algebra was, how good his robotics club was doing, how his dad got weird every time he asked about Grandpa. Walter listened more than he talked, nodding, laughing softly in the right places. At one point Sam said, "I think Dad's scared sometimes. Like, if he talks about you too much, something might come back that he's not ready for." Walter sipped his coffee and looked out across the yard. "I was scared too. For a long time. Thought I'd already missed my chance. To fix things?" Sam asked. "To matter again," Walter said. "Turns out, you don't need anyone's permission for that." After lunch, they went back into the garage. Sam got down under the cart, holding a flashlight while Walter adjusted the drive chain. The boy's voice echoed up from beneath the frame. "So when did you start working on this again?" "Few weeks ago," Walter said. "After watching a video, actually." "What kind of video?" Walter hesitated. "Elon Musk. Talking about showing up on the hard days. Doing it anyway. Hit me like a hammer." Sam poked his head out. "Dad thinks Elon's kind of nuts." Walter chuckled. "Probably is. But sometimes the nuts say the stuff no one else has the guts to." Sam considered that. "I kinda like him. He built rockets because he wanted to go to Mars, even when everyone laughed." "Exactly," Walter said. "Didn't wait for the world to catch up. Just started building." They worked until dusk. At one point, the cart rolled forward 6 feet under battery power before the chain slipped. Both of them hollered like they'd won the Super Bowl. Later, Sam asked if he could try driving it. Walter shook his head. Not yet. Needs real brakes first. I'm old, not crazy. Sam laughed and said, "You're kinda cool, Grandpa." Walter's heart swelled with something he hadn't felt in years. That night, after Jack picked Sam up, Walter stood alone in the garage. The cart sat silently, but not still. It had changed. So had everything else. The project was no longer about reliving the past, it was about rewriting it. He picked up his phone and recorded a short clip. "Today I got help from someone very important. His name's Sam, and he's my grandson. First time in the garage together, and he already knows more about electricity than I did at 50. We rolled 6 feet. But it felt like flying. Never underestimate what a day in the garage can repair. Or who it can reconnect." He uploaded it and went to bed. The next morning, the comments were overwhelming. "This is what healing looks like. I'm crying watching this. Reminds me of my dad and me. Walter, you're changing lives, man. One bolt at a time." That week, he and Sam made a plan to meet every Saturday. "Unless we're racing by then," Sam had joked. Walter didn't correct him. Didn't say they probably wouldn't race. He just smiled. Because you never knew. Not anymore. The rules were different now. Time wasn't just something that drained away. It was something you could fill. With noise. With laughter. With oil-stained fingers and second chances. With grandsons in garages and go-karts rolling 6 feet into the future. The following Saturdays came with a rhythm Walter hadn't felt since his factory days, back when time moved with the shape of tasks, the heat of machinery, the scent of real work done with hands and sweat. Every Friday night, he cleaned the garage like he was expecting royalty. Every Saturday morning, Sam arrived, same hoodie, same scuffed sneakers, backpack slung over one shoulder, his voice always one note deeper than the week before. There was something sacred in the routine, though neither of them ever said it aloud. They just showed up, side by side, tackling whatever new glitch or loose bolt revealed itself in the belly of the cart. Sam had questions about everything. Not just the mechanics, but the history. Why did you and Dad stop building this in the first place? Walter would pause every time. He'd run a hand over the frame, take a breath. Life got in the way, he'd say. I worked long hours. Your dad got older, made new friends, didn't want to hang out in the garage as much. I let it slip away. Sam nodded, always thoughtful, never pushing. Sometimes he'd say, I don't think Dad really forgot. I think he just didn't know how to pick it back up. And Walter would nod too, silently grateful for the insight only a teenager, standing far enough away from the past to see it clearly, could offer. They replaced the battery mount, reworked the throttle linkage, and rewired the headlamp so that it glowed soft and blue like the promise of motion. Walter taught Sam how to strip a wire, torque a bolt, sand a rusted joint until it shined. Sam taught Walter how to upload better videos, how to add captions, how to respond to DMs without accidentally deleting them. You're kind of famous, Sam said once, holding up Walter's phone. This one got 50,000 views. Walter shook his head. I didn't do this for followers. I know, Sam said. But they're following because they see you. And people want to believe it's not too late. That struck something deep inside Walter, because for decades, he believed exactly the opposite. Now, because of a camera, a go-kart, and a few brave Saturdays, he was beginning to unlearn that lie. One afternoon, Jack dropped Sam off and lingered in the garage for the first time. He hovered near the workbench, hands in his jacket pockets, eyes darting from the cart to the shelves and then to his father. Looks better than I remember, Jack said, nodding toward the cart. Walter smiled, cautious. She's coming along. I used to think we'd never finish it, Jack added. I used to think it didn't matter. I thought the same, Walter said. But I was wrong. We both were. Jack knelt beside the cart, ran his fingers across the steering column. Sam talks about this like it's a time machine. Walter chuckled. Maybe it is. I don't mean going back, Jack said. I mean going forward, but together. Walter felt the lump rise in his throat before he could stop it. All those years of distance, of pride wrapped around pain, melted just a little in that moment. You want to help us finish it? Walter asked, his voice rough. Jack paused. Then nodded. Yeah. I think I do. From that Saturday on, the garage became a three-generation workshop. Jack handled the more intricate electrical components. He still remembered some of what he learned in college. Sam took over filming, documenting their progress with a surprising eye for storytelling. Walter focused on the mechanical parts, the heavy lifting, the soul of the build. They argued, joked, teased. Sometimes Jack would shake his head and say, "You know, Dad, if we'd just bought a new one, it'd have taken half the time." And Walter would reply, "Yeah, but it wouldn't mean anything." The account grew faster now. Followers poured in from around the world. A father and son in Indiana sent a picture of their own garage project, inspired by Walter. A woman in Florida messaged to say her 80-year-old mother had started painting again after decades because, if Walter can build a cart, I can paint a flower. Elon Musk himself retweeted one of Walter's videos with the caption, "This guy gets it. Age isn't the limit. Mindset is." Walter stared at that post for nearly an hour, unsure if it was real. Then he printed it and taped it above his workbench. Not as a trophy, but as fuel. The cart came together piece by piece. New tires. Reinforced frame. A coat of cherry red paint that gleamed like ambition. Walter splurged on new brake pads and a better seatbelt system, not because they planned on going fast, but because they planned on going anywhere at all. And finally, one crisp Saturday morning, they rolled the cart out into the driveway. The whole family gathered. Liz with coffee, her husband holding a phone to record, Sam practically bouncing on his heels, Jack steadying the cart like a proud big brother. Walter climbed in, heart pounding. "You sure about this?" Jack asked. "Nope," Walter grinned. "But that's never stopped me before." Sam gave a dramatic countdown, 3, 2, 1, Walter pressed the throttle. The cart jolted forward, smooth and solid, humming down the driveway, 30 feet in the span of a breath. Not fast. Not flashy. But perfect. Everyone cheered. Sam sprinted after the cart. Jack laughed, wiping a tear from his eye. Liz clapped, her smile wide and unguarded. Walter rolled to a stop, lifted his arms, and whispered to himself, "We built this. After all these years." That night, they posted the video with the caption, "Finished isn't about time. It's about heart. 3 generations. 1 dream. It's never too late to start again." It went viral overnight. The story made local news, then national. A talk show producer called. A documentary team reached out. People from senior centers, veterans groups, tech meetups, and high schools started asking Walter to speak, to share the story of how a man on the edge of fading found his fire again with a frame, a motor, and a spark. But what mattered most wasn't the views or the invites. It was the text Walter received from Jack the next day. Just 3 words, "I'm proud, Dad." And Walter, sitting alone in the quiet garage, let himself cry for the first time in years. Not from pain. Not from regret. But from something else. Something new. Something called redemption. Not flashy. Not instant. But real. Earned. And absolutely, beautifully his. Walter woke up that Monday morning with the sunlight spilling through the curtains, hitting the dust motes in the air like tiny stars. The usual hum of the neighborhood was quieter than usual, but his phone was buzzing relentlessly on the nightstand. He grabbed it, eyes blinking against the early light, and saw notifications piling up like wildfire. The video of the cart rolling down the driveway had exploded overnight. Comments flooded in from all over the country, encouragement, thanks, even challenges from others who wanted to prove they weren't done yet. The morning news anchor's tweet was there, linking to a story about Walter and his family rebuilding a dream. Then, a message from the producer of a popular daytime talk show appeared. Would Walter be interested in sharing his story with millions? Walter stared at the screen, disbelief and excitement warring inside him. For years, he had hidden in plain sight, convinced the best he could hope for was quiet days and fading memories. Now the world seemed to be telling him otherwise. He called Liz, whose laughter was warm and steady on the other end. "They want to put you on TV, Walter," she said. "They want to hear about you, the cart, the family." Walter exhaled, feeling his chest tighten with nerves he thought had long since vanished. "Me? On TV?" "Yeah, you," Liz said. "I think it's time." After breakfast, Jack and Sam joined him in the garage. The old tools, the half-finished frames, the smell of motor oil, it all felt different now, charged with possibility. "What do you think?" Walter asked. Jack smiled and clapped him on the shoulder. "You're going to be great." Sam nodded enthusiastically. "We'll practice with you. Make sure you don't forget your lines." Walter laughed, feeling the familiar warmth of family wrap around him like a shield. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind. The talk show segment filmed in the very garage where the cart had been reborn, capturing the creak of the floorboards and the light filtering through the cracked windows. Walter spoke about the power of starting again, about the spark Elon Musk had ignited in him when he said, "If something is important enough, you do it even if the odds are not in your favor." The episode aired, and the response was immediate. Emails poured in from people who'd watched and felt something stir inside, a mother who was finally enrolling in college classes at 68, a Vietnam vet picking up painting after 40 years, a young man caring for his aging grandfather who needed hope. Walter's inbox was filled with stories of second chances, of rediscovering purpose, of breaking free from the limits society had tried to place on them. The media attention brought opportunities Walter had never dreamed possible. Invitations to speak at senior centers, community colleges, and even tech conferences where age was often seen as a barrier rather than an asset. Every stage felt like a chance to remind others, and himself, that it was never too late to build, to create, to matter. Yet with all the excitement came moments of doubt. The old voice inside his head whispered warnings. What if you fail in front of millions? What if this is just a fluke? What if you're fooling yourself? Each night, Walter would sit in the quiet garage, fingers tracing the worn steering wheel of the cart, and breathe in the scent of rubber and grease. He'd remember Elon Musk's words about fear and failure, the idea that courage wasn't the absence of fear, but acting in spite of it. And he'd push himself forward, one step, one word, one wrench at a time. One afternoon, a letter arrived from Elon Musk's company. Walter's hands trembled as he unfolded it. Inside was a personal note praising his determination and an invitation to visit the SpaceX headquarters. "Come see where the impossible is just a starting point," the letter read. Walter shared the news with Liz, Jack, and Sam, and the garage erupted in cheers. The trip wasn't just a visit, it was a pilgrimage. At SpaceX, Walter walked through the corridors lined with prototypes, models, and dreams made real by vision and grit. He met engineers, visionaries, and even Elon himself, who shook his hand and said, "Keep pushing. The world needs more people who refuse to fade." The encounter planted a new seed in Walter's heart. If a man half his age could build rockets to Mars, what was stopping him from building a future he never thought possible? Back home, Walter and his family continued their work on the cart, now more determined than ever. They upgraded the motor, added safety features, and began planning their first real race, an event at a local fair meant to showcase projects built by seniors and young people alike. The announcement of the race spread through social media, attracting participants from all walks of life. Walter found himself at the center of a growing community, a movement of people rewriting what it meant to grow older. On race day, the sun shone bright and clear. The fairgrounds buzzed with energy, the scent of popcorn and gasoline mingling in the air. Walter felt the familiar flutter of nerves as the cart lined up alongside other handmade vehicles. Spectators cheered, children waved, and old friends stood by his side. When it was his turn, Walter climbed into the cart, heart pounding with a mix of fear and exhilaration. Sam gave him a thumbs up, Jack grinned wide, and Liz squeezed his hand. The engine roared to life, and the cart surged forward, faster and smoother than ever before. For those brief moments, Walter wasn't just an old man trying to hold on to the past. He was a man who had defied time itself, proving that the fire inside could burn brighter with every year. Crossing the finish line, the crowd erupted into applause. Tears streamed down Walter's cheeks as he realized something profound: this wasn't the end of his story. It was just the beginning of a new chapter, one fueled by courage, family, and the relentless pursuit of purpose. That night, as Walter sat alone in the quiet garage, he looked at the cart and whispered, "I was never too old to change. I was just waiting to believe it." And somewhere far away, a man building rockets smiled, knowing he'd helped light that spark. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Walter stared at the invitation in his hands, the embossed logo of a well-known innovation conference shimmering under the soft light of the kitchen. His fingers trembled as he traced the elegant script: "We are honored to invite you to be a featured speaker at the annual Future Innovators Summit." The words felt surreal, like a whisper from a life he never thought he could claim. He thought back to that first video he'd posted from the garage, uncertain if anyone would care, and now this, an invitation to stand on a stage alongside inventors, thinkers, and dreamers decades younger. The thought made his chest tighten with excitement and fear. What could he possibly say to a room full of people pushing the boundaries of technology, when he'd only just started rebuilding a go-kart? But then he remembered Elon's voice from that early video, saying, "If something is important enough, you do it even if the odds are not in your favor." Walter swallowed the knot in his throat and dialed Liz. She answered quickly, her voice warm and steady. "Walter." "Liz, I got something. An invitation. To speak. At the summit." There was a pause, and then laughter. "You're going to knock their socks off." That afternoon, Jack and Sam gathered around the kitchen table as Walter carefully read the details of the event. "It's in San Francisco," Walter said. "Next month." Sam's eyes widened. "That's huge, Grandpa. You're like a real-deal innovator now." Jack grinned but looked thoughtful. "You ready for this?" Walter shrugged. "Not really. But I think I'm ready to try." The weeks that followed were a blur of preparation. Walter practiced his speech in front of the kitchen window, in the garage, even in front of the mirror. He wrote and rewrote, trying to capture the journey, the loneliness, the spark, the family that brought him back to life. Each time he stumbled over a word, he remembered Elon's persistence, the countless failures before success. He wasn't perfect, and that was okay. On the morning of the summit, Walter woke early, dressed carefully in a crisp shirt and jacket Liz had picked out. The airport was buzzing with energy, strangers speaking dozens of languages, all gathered for the same reason: to change the world. Walter felt like a small boat in a vast ocean, but also a part of something greater than himself. At the conference center, the lights were bright, the air thick with possibility. Walter watched innovators unveil robotics, sustainable energy projects, and artificial intelligence breakthroughs. When it was his turn, he stepped onto the stage, heart pounding like the roar of a race engine. The spotlight felt warm, not blinding, and the audience's eyes settled on him expectantly. Walter took a deep breath and began, "I'm Walter Thompson. A man who thought he was too old to matter until a spark, an unlikely one, ignited a fire inside me." He spoke about feeling forgotten, about the years lost to fear and doubt, and how Elon Musk's words had challenged him to start again. He told the story of the cart, the Saturdays in the garage with his grandson, and the moment they rolled it out to the driveway. The crowd listened, rapt, some nodding, others wiping tears. Walter saw faces light up with recognition, faces that understood what it meant to fight against the tide of time. After his talk, the applause was thunderous, echoing in his chest long after he left the stage. Backstage, a young woman approached him. "Mr. Thompson, your story changed how I think about aging. I'm a software engineer, and I'm launching a program to teach seniors coding. I'd love to work with you." Walter smiled, feeling the circle widen. Over the next few days, Walter attended panels, met creators, and forged connections that breathed new life into his dreams. He visited the Tesla showroom and marveled at the electric cars, thinking of the cart's new battery. One evening, Elon Musk himself appeared at a keynote, and Walter was invited to join him briefly behind the scenes. They shook hands again, and Elon said quietly, "You're proof it's never too late. Keep pushing." The words settled in Walter's mind like a steady drumbeat. Returning home, Walter brought back not just souvenirs but a renewed sense of purpose. He began working with that software engineer to create a local program teaching seniors how to use technology to build and share their own projects. The cart became more than a family hobby, it became a symbol of what could be possible for anyone willing to take that first step. Walter's story spread beyond the internet and television, inspiring communities to embrace their older members as innovators and contributors. The line between generations blurred as young and old gathered in garages, workshops, and online forums to build, teach, and learn together. One evening, sitting on the porch with Liz and watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink, Walter said, "I never thought this would be my life at 72. Liz smiled, squeezing his hand. "It's your life now, Walter. And it's just getting started." He looked at the stars beginning to twinkle overhead and felt, for the first time in a long time, that the future was wide open. That no matter the number, there was always room to dream, to build, to change. And that sometimes, all it takes is one invitation, one spark, to light a fire that burns for a lifetime. The garage smelled like motor oil and fresh paint, the scent now familiar and comforting, a reminder of the transformation happening not just in the space but in Walter himself. He stood back, wiping sweat from his brow, watching Sam tighten the last bolt on the cart's newly reinforced chassis. The red paint gleamed under the flickering fluorescent light, reflecting the determination that had carried them this far. But tonight, it wasn't just about finishing the cart, it was about rebuilding something deeper. Walter's hands trembled slightly as he reached for a dusty box tucked in the corner, one he hadn't opened in decades. It was filled with letters, old photographs, and the tools he'd used when he first started his career in the factory. Among the memories, a faded picture caught his eye, a young Walter with his wife, Liz, standing beside a freshly built go-kart that never made it beyond the driveway. His chest tightened at the sight of her smile, bright and full of dreams, untouched by the weariness that life would later bring. The cart had always been a symbol of hope and promise, a bond between him and his late wife. Yet after her passing, it had become a reminder of loss, a project abandoned, much like his own hope. Now, with Jack and Sam by his side, Walter realized that the cart represented more than just a machine, it was a bridge to healing, a way to reclaim not only his purpose but the relationships frayed by time and regret. "You okay, Grandpa?" Sam's voice broke through the silence, gentle and curious. Walter smiled, pulling himself from the past. "Yeah, just remembering." The boys exchanged a glance, sensing the weight behind his words. Over the following days, Walter began reaching out to old friends he hadn't spoken to in years. Calls that once felt daunting now brought unexpected joy. He told stories, apologized for lost time, and invited them to see the cart's progress. Slowly, the walls he had built around himself began to crumble. One afternoon, Jack suggested a family dinner to celebrate the cart's nearing completion. Walter hesitated, unsure if the wounds of the past could be mended with a meal. But when Liza's sister arrived with a homemade apple pie, and laughter filled the dining room, he felt the power of connection ignite once more. That night, as Walter sat in his favorite chair, he realized the cart had done more than bring him new fame or opportunities, it had helped him rebuild the broken pieces of his life. Inspired by the changes, Walter began volunteering at the local community center, leading workshops where seniors could learn basic mechanics, woodworking, and even digital skills. The classes became a beacon for others who, like Walter, had felt invisible or stuck. His story encouraged them to try, to fail, and to try again. Each session was a reminder that growth was possible at any age. One young volunteer, Maya, shared her own struggles caring for her aging grandmother. Together, they brainstormed ways to combine technology and compassion to improve the lives of seniors. The collaboration sparked new ideas, leading Walter to envision a community project that merged tradition with innovation, a makerspace designed specifically for older adults, where creativity and mentorship flourished. As the cart's final test run approached, Walter invited the neighbors, friends, and community members who had supported him. The event felt like a celebration of life itself, proof that even when it seems all is lost, renewal is within reach. Standing behind the wheel, Walter felt the weight of years lift from his shoulders. The cart roared to life, accelerating down the driveway with steady power, carrying not just his body but a lifetime of lessons, hopes, and dreams forward. When he stopped, the applause was thunderous, but the true victory was silent and profound, a testament to resilience, family, and the unbreakable human spirit. That night, Walter wrote in his journal, "I was ready to fade away, but instead I found a way to rebuild. Not just a cart, but my life, my relationships, and my purpose. The journey is far from over, but I know now that it's never too late to start again." And with that, Walter closed the garage door, stepping into the future he had fought so hard to reclaim, one bold step at a time. Walter woke to the gentle hum of morning light filtering through the curtains, the familiar sounds of the neighborhood stirring slowly awake. His phone buzzed on the nightstand, and when he reached for it, a flood of messages awaited him, updates from the community center, invitations to speak at local events, and heartfelt notes from people whose lives had shifted because of his journey. It was hard to believe that the simple act of rebuilding a go-kart had created such a ripple, spreading hope and inspiration far beyond his quiet town. At the community center, Walter's workshop had grown from a small group of curious seniors to a bustling hub where energy crackled in the air, and ideas took shape on tablet screens and workbenches. Maya, the young volunteer with a passion for tech, had helped him launch a program teaching basic coding and digital design. They called it Second Act Innovators, a place where age was a superpower, not a limitation. One afternoon, as Walter demonstrated how to solder wires for a small robot, he noticed a woman hesitating at the doorway. She was in her late 60s, dressed neatly but with a shadow of uncertainty in her eyes. "Hi, I'm Clara," she said softly. "I've been watching from outside, and I think I want to try." Walter smiled warmly. "You're already one of us." Clara's story unfolded over the next weeks. A retired schoolteacher, she'd felt lost since her husband's passing and the estrangement from her daughter. The community center became her sanctuary, a place where failure was part of learning and every success, no matter how small, was celebrated. Walter saw himself in Clara, the quiet battle against invisibility, the search for meaning. Their conversations deepened, and one day Clara confessed, "I'm afraid to dream again, Walter." He placed a steady hand on her shoulder. Dreams don't have expiration dates. Sometimes they just need a little dusting off. Inspired by Clara and others like her, Walter proposed expanding their program into a mobile makerspace that could travel to nearby towns, reaching those unable to come to the center. The idea sparked enthusiasm among local leaders and volunteers, and soon plans were underway. Walter's story caught the attention of a regional newspaper, which ran a feature titled, "The Senior Spark: How One Man's Journey is Lighting Up Communities." The piece brought new visitors to the workshops, including younger people curious about the wisdom and creativity flourishing among the seniors. One such visitor was Leo, a high school student fascinated by robotics and eager to learn from Walter's experience. The two formed an unlikely friendship, sharing knowledge and bridging generations through a shared love of building. Meanwhile, the cart had become more than a personal project, it was a symbol of community spirit. Walter organized annual races where participants of all ages designed and raced their own vehicles, fostering teamwork and creativity. The events drew families, neighbors, and even local businesses who saw the power of investing in older adults' potential. As Walter stood at one such race, watching the sun set over a crowd of cheering faces, he realized how far he'd come from the days of loneliness and doubt. The ripple effect of his choice to start again was transforming lives, breaking down stereotypes, and building a legacy of courage and connection. That night, he received a message from Elon Musk's team, congratulating him on the impact he was making and inviting him to collaborate on a documentary about innovation across generations. Walter smiled, feeling the threads of his journey weaving into a tapestry he never imagined possible. Before sleep, he wrote in his journal, "One small spark can ignite a fire that lights up the world. I was ready to fade away, but instead, I became part of something greater. The ripple goes on." And with that thought, Walter drifted into dreams filled with the endless possibilities of tomorrow. Despite the whirlwind of new connections, invitations, and the growing community around him, Walter found himself wrestling with a familiar shadow, doubt. It was late one evening, the house quiet except for the ticking clock and the soft hum of the heater. Walter sat alone in his study, a photo of Liz on the desk before him, her smile frozen in time. The silence pressed in, and the old fears whispered louder than ever, was he really making a difference? Or was this all just a fleeting moment of glory? The idea crept in like fog, maybe he was too old, maybe the world had already moved on without him. He recalled the days when the doctor advised him to slow down, the skeptical glances from family members who thought he should know his limits. Even the compliments felt tinged with pity sometimes, as if his efforts were sweet but ultimately futile. One night, after a particularly restless sleep, Walter found himself scrolling through social media, where the latest viral stories flashed by. A young genius launching a startup, a tech prodigy creating a breakthrough app. He admired their achievements but couldn't help the sting of comparison. What had he really done? Just fixed an old cart? Started a small program? The questions piled up, each one heavier than the last. Seeking some clarity, Walter decided to revisit the old garage, the place where it all began. The familiar scent of oil and wood soothed him, grounding him in the memories of hard work and small victories. Sitting on the worn stool, he pulled out the journal he'd kept since the cart's resurrection. Flipping through pages filled with hopes, fears, and reflections, he saw the progress, not just in the cart, but in himself. The courage to start again, the resilience to keep going despite setbacks, the willingness to reach out and connect. Then he remembered Elon Musk's words from that first video that had changed everything: when something is important enough, you do it even if the odds are not in your favor. Walter realized those words weren't about winning every race or becoming famous, they were about the grit to keep trying, to keep building, and to keep believing in the possibility of change. He picked up his phone and watched the message from Clara, one of the women in his workshop. She'd sent a video showing her first successful attempt at assembling a small robot, beaming with pride. Walter felt a warmth spread through him, a reminder that impact wasn't always immediate or grand. Sometimes it was quiet, unfolding in the lives touched by patience and encouragement. Still, the doubts lingered, especially when setbacks hit. The community center's funding was uncertain, some volunteers had to step back, and Walter himself struggled with aches and fatigue that slowed him down. One afternoon, after a particularly hard day, Jack found him resting in the garage. "You okay, Grandpa?" Jack asked, concern in his eyes. Walter nodded slowly. Just wrestling with the usual ghosts. Jack sat beside him. You've come so far. Don't let the doubt win now. Those words echoed, and Walter understood that doubt wasn't a sign of failure, it was part of the journey. The key was how he responded. He reached out to his friends, his family, and the community, sharing his struggles honestly. To his surprise, many admitted they faced similar fears. Together, they formed a circle of support, a reminder that no one had to face the battle alone. Inspired, Walter began incorporating mindfulness and reflection into his workshops, teaching others to recognize and face their doubts without being consumed by them. The makerspace became a place not just of creation, but of healing and growth. One evening, after a successful community event celebrating the achievements of the participants, Walter stood before the crowd and shared his vulnerability openly. There are days I question everything, he said, voice steady but raw. But I've learned that doubt is a companion, not an enemy. It means you're pushing boundaries. It means you care. And it means you're still alive. The room erupted in applause, faces shining with understanding. That night, Walter sat quietly, feeling a peace that had eluded him for years. He knew the journey ahead would still have challenges, but he was ready to meet them, with courage, grace, and the unshakable belief that it was never too late to matter. He wrote in his journal one last time before sleep. Doubt is real. Fear is real. But so is the fire inside. I will keep stoking it. And with that, Walter closed his eyes, the promise of tomorrow bright on the horizon. Walter's days had settled into a rhythm of work at the community center, conversations with Maya, and quiet evenings reflecting on the journey that had brought him this far. Yet beneath the steady progress, a new restlessness stirred, an urge to push beyond the familiar, to test the limits of what he thought possible at his age. It was during one of those restless afternoons that the unexpected arrived, a phone call that would shift Walter's path in ways he never anticipated. The voice on the other end was confident but warm. Mr. Thompson. This is Rachel from the Regional Innovation Network. We've been following your story and your work at the community center. I'd like to invite you to join our mentorship program, partnering experienced innovators with emerging entrepreneurs. Walter blinked, surprised. Me? A mentor? Absolutely, Rachel said. Your journey and resilience are exactly what many young founders need. Plus, your hands-on experience with bridging generations is unique. Think of it as paying forward the spark Elon helped ignite. The idea of mentoring someone younger both thrilled and intimidated Walter. He had learned so much, but did he have anything left to teach? After some thought, he agreed. A week later, he met Leo again, the high school student he'd connected with during the races. Leo was now launching a startup focused on sustainable transportation, a project fueled by idealism and technical skill but lacking experience navigating the messy realities of business and leadership. Their first meeting was tentative, a bridge between generations built on curiosity and respect. Walter shared stories of setbacks and small victories, reminding Leo that innovation wasn't just about brilliance but persistence and adaptability. In turn, Leo brought fresh energy and new ideas, challenging Walter's assumptions and pushing him to embrace unfamiliar technologies. Over months, their mentorship evolved into a partnership. They worked late into evenings, sketching designs, troubleshooting problems, and celebrating breakthroughs. Walter taught Leo the importance of resilience, the value of community, and the need to embrace failure as a step toward success. Leo showed Walter how to use software tools and digital platforms that made building and sharing ideas faster and more accessible. Together, they crafted a prototype for an electric bike designed for seniors, blending Walter's understanding of aging bodies with Leo's tech expertise. The project symbolized the fusion of their worlds, a testament to the power of collaboration across generations. Meanwhile, Walter's own confidence grew. Mentoring Leo reminded him that wisdom didn't come just from years but from the willingness to listen, learn, and adapt. He began to see his age not as a barrier but as an asset, a repository of lessons that could guide others through challenges he had faced. As their project gained attention, Walter was invited to speak at conferences, sharing the story of how the unexpected mentorship had enriched both their lives. He emphasized the mutual gift of connection and the idea that mentorship was a two-way street. One evening, after a successful presentation, Walter found himself backstage, reflecting on the journey. Maya approached with a smile. "You've come full circle, Walter. From being inspired by Elon to inspiring the next generation." Walter nodded, feeling a profound gratitude. Sometimes the mentors we need come when we least expect them. And sometimes, we become mentors by simply showing up. The mentorship also brought new healing to Walter's relationships. Seeing Leo's youthful determination rekindled memories of his own missed opportunities with Jack and Sam. He made a point to spend more time with his grandsons, sharing not just projects but life lessons about resilience, hope, and the courage to start again. Jack and Sam, inspired by their grandfather's journey and his work with Leo, began exploring their own interests with renewed enthusiasm. The family bond strengthened, built on shared dreams and mutual respect. Walter's health, once a concern, improved with the active lifestyle that the electric bike project encouraged. He took daily rides around the neighborhood, feeling the wind and the freedom that movement brought. Each pedal stroke was a reminder that age was a measure of experience, not limitation. One afternoon, while visiting the community center, Walter received a call from Rachel. "We're launching a new initiative to connect innovators across age groups nationwide. We want you to help design the program." Walter accepted eagerly, seeing another opportunity to build bridges and create lasting impact. As he hung up, he looked around the workshop filled with people of all ages, laughing, learning, creating. The unexpected mentor he had become was not just teaching skills but nurturing hope, proving that transformation was possible at any stage of life. That night, Walter wrote in his journal, "Mentorship is not about knowing all the answers, but about showing the way with honesty and heart. In guiding others, I find myself renewed." The fire Elon spark still burns, fueled now by connection and purpose. And with a contented sigh, Walter closed his eyes, ready for whatever the future held. Walter had grown used to the steady rhythm of progress, the steady pulse of purpose beating in his chest. Yet life, as it often does, was about to remind him that transformation was never a straight line. It came crashing in the form of a sudden health scare, a sharp pain in his chest during a community event, a rush to the hospital, and the cold diagnosis, a mild heart attack. The news hit Walter harder than he expected. In that sterile hospital room, surrounded by machines and doctors' cautious words, he felt the weight of every doubt he'd ever wrestled with return tenfold. Was this the body finally catching up with the years? Was the journey he'd fought so hard to reclaim about to end abruptly? The next few days were a blur of tests, medications, and stern warnings from doctors to slow down, to take it easy, to accept the limitations of age. Walter bristled at the idea of retreat. Yet his body, tired and fragile, forced him to confront a reality he had long avoided, the balance between pushing forward and knowing when to rest. Back home, the silence of his house felt oppressive. The community center continued without him, the CART projects paused, and the calls from volunteers and friends poured in, filled with concern. Even Jack and Sam worried, urging their grandfather to focus on recovery. Walter's frustration simmered beneath the surface. How could he explain that the fight inside him was as fierce as ever, even if his body faltered? During one particularly low afternoon, Walter found himself scrolling through old journal entries, searching for strength in the words he had written during darker times. Then, unexpectedly, he found solace in a quote from Elon Musk that had once inspired him: "Persistence is very important. You should not give up unless you are forced to give up." The phrase became a lifeline. Walter began to redefine what persistence meant in this new chapter, not reckless endurance, but mindful resilience. He worked closely with his doctors and physical therapists, learning to listen to his body without surrendering his spirit. Slowly, He adapted his routines, incorporating gentle exercise, meditation, and rest. The community center rallied around him, organizing visits, sending updates, and sharing their own stories of overcoming setbacks. Walter's role shifted temporarily from hands-on mentor to advisor and motivator, showing that leadership could take many forms. One day, Maya brought him a prototype of the electric bike they had been developing with Leo, modified for safety and ease of use. Seeing the project evolve reminded Walter that progress didn't stop with one person, it was a shared journey. His family, too, stepped up. Jack took on more responsibilities at home and with the workshops, and Sam wrote a blog about his grandfather's story that quickly gained traction online, spreading Walter's message of hope to thousands. As Walter healed, he faced the challenge of balancing caution with courage. There were moments of fear, waking up at night with a racing heart, doubting whether he could continue the work he loved. But each time, he returned to the community and the purpose that had reignited his life. The kart races resumed with new safety measures in place, and Walter cheered from the sidelines, proud of the legacy being built. One afternoon, as he sat in the garden reflecting on the journey, Walter realized that the heart attack, painful as it was, had taught him a vital lesson. Strength wasn't about denying vulnerability, it was about embracing it and adapting with grace. The fire within him still burned, but now it was tempered with wisdom and self-compassion. Walter wrote in his journal, "The challenge almost broke me, but it also rebuilt me. I'm learning that persistence is not stubbornness, it's a dance between heart and mind. I'm still here, still fighting, still dreaming." And with that, he looked out at the horizon, ready to face whatever came next, knowing that the true test of transformation was not how hard you fell, but how bravely you rose. The morning sun spilled golden light across Walter's kitchen table as he sat, fingers wrapped around a warm mug of coffee, heart steady but mind racing. Today was the day, the moment he'd been preparing for, the event that could either solidify the work he'd poured himself into or remind him of all the reasons to give up. The community center's biggest fundraiser, a celebration of the makerspace and the innovative spirit blossoming among seniors and youth alike, was scheduled to feature a keynote speech from Walter himself. Weeks of preparation had led to this point, yet the familiar knot of nerves tightened in his stomach. Would he find the words? Would his story resonate beyond the room? Would he still be the same man who had nearly faded away at 70? Walking into the event hall, Walter was greeted by a buzz of excitement. Volunteers bustled, decorations hung with care, and the cart he had lovingly restored was displayed prominently, a symbol of perseverance. Faces from the community filled the seats, friends, family, mentors, and even some new faces drawn by the growing buzz around Walter's journey. As the microphone approached, Walter took a deep breath and glanced out at the sea of expectant faces. He thought of Liz, her smile forever etched in his heart, and the spark Elon Musk's words had ignited within him. "What if everything you believed about getting old was wrong?" he began, his voice steady but warm. "I know I believed it for a long time, that at a certain age, you're supposed to slow down, fade away, let go of dreams. But that's not the truth. Age is not a cage. It's a canvas." The room fell silent, every ear tuned in. Walter shared the story of his darkest days, the loneliness, the regrets, and then the moment Elon's words pierced through the fog. He spoke of the cart, the community center, the friendships forged, and the mentorship that had brought new purpose. He didn't shy away from the doubts or the heart attack, but framed them as part of the tapestry of growth. "I was ready to fade away, but instead, I was ready to begin again," Walter said, eyes shining. "And if I can do it, so can you. It's never too late to matter, to build, to dream." When he finished, the hall erupted in applause, standing ovations that carried the weight of shared hope. Tears glistened on faces young and old, a collective recognition of the power of transformation. After the speech, Walter was surrounded by hugs and congratulations. A woman approached him, her voice trembling with emotion. "Your story saved me," she said. "I was ready to give up, but now I'm going to start painting again." Another man, a retired engineer, spoke of joining the makerspace, eager to contribute. Walter realized his words had sparked something greater than he imagined, a movement, a community awakened to the possibilities within themselves. That evening, as the celebration wound down, Walter stepped outside into the cool night air. The stars shone brightly overhead, a reminder of endless possibility. He called Maya and Leo to share the moment, their voices filled with joy and pride. In the quiet that followed, Walter reflected on the journey. Every doubt faced, every challenge overcome, every connection made. The moment of truth had arrived, not as a grand finale, but as a new beginning. He wrote in his journal, "The truth is this, life doesn't end because of age or fear. It begins anew with every choice, every risk, every moment of courage. I was ready to fade away, but instead, I'm shining brighter than ever." And with that, Walter looked to the future, open, limitless, and waiting for the next chapter to be written. Walter woke that morning with a sense of calm determination. The fundraiser had passed, leaving behind a ripple of excitement and new possibilities, and now the question hung in the air like a fresh breeze: what came next? For years, he had been defined by his past regrets and the creeping fear of fading away, but now, standing at this new horizon, Walter felt something different: possibility. The community center was abuzz with plans to expand the makerspace, to launch new workshops, to deepen the connections between seniors and youth. Walter, now seen as a leader and symbol of resilience, was invited to help shape this vision. At first, the idea of taking on new projects was intimidating. He worried about overcommitting, about his health, about the unpredictable nature of life. Yet the flame of purpose burned stronger than the fear. He decided to take a leap, not a giant one, but a steady step forward. Walter began designing a program that combined technology with storytelling, a way for seniors to capture and share their life stories using digital media. The goal was to preserve wisdom, build empathy, and create a bridge across generations. He recruited volunteers, including Jack and Sam, Maya, Leo, and several new faces drawn to the community's spirit. Together, they crafted a curriculum blending writing, recording, and simple video editing, meeting weekly in the sunlit rooms of the community center. Walter watched as participants slowly shed their hesitation, finding joy in telling their stories and pride in their creations. The project became more than just a workshop; it was a sanctuary where memories became legacy and voices once silenced found new strength. One afternoon, as Walter helped a woman named Grace record a story about her childhood in the Midwest, he felt the deep healing power of connection. Grace's eyes sparkled with emotion as she recounted her adventures, and Walter realized that everyone carried untold treasures waiting to be uncovered. Meanwhile, Walter's partnership with Leo continued to thrive. The electric bike project had secured funding and was moving toward production, a tangible outcome of their collaboration that symbolized hope for aging with independence and dignity. Walter took pride in the fact that his idea was no longer just a dream but a real product designed to improve lives. His relationship with his grandsons blossomed, too. Jack and Sam, inspired by the new storytelling project, began interviewing neighbors and family members, creating their own digital diaries. Family dinners became lively discussions about dreams, challenges, and the meaning of legacy. Walter no longer felt isolated by age or circumstance; he was woven into the fabric of a vibrant community spanning generations. As the seasons changed, Walter often found himself on his porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of orange and pink. The horizon was no longer a boundary but an invitation. One evening, Maya joined him with a notebook filled with new ideas for expanding the center's impact. "What if we take the storytelling program to other towns?" she asked. "Create a network of seniors sharing their stories across the country?" Walter smiled, heart swelling with pride. "Let's do it." The months that followed were filled with travel, presentations, and the joy of meeting people eager to reclaim their voices. Walter spoke at conferences, community gatherings, and even schools, sharing his journey and encouraging others to embrace the power of change. Despite the demands, he maintained a balance, listening to his body, savoring quiet moments, and nurturing the relationships that sustained him. One crisp autumn day, Walter received an email that brought tears to his eyes. A publisher wanted to turn the stories collected through his program into a book, amplifying the voices of seniors nationwide. The news was a testament to how far he had come, from a man ready to fade away to a catalyst for transformation. That night, as Walter wrote in his journal, he reflected on the journey and the horizon before him. I once thought the end was near. Now I see it's just the beginning of something greater. A legacy built not on what I lost, but what I choose to create. And as the stars twinkled overhead, Walter felt a profound peace, knowing that the new horizon was limitless and his story was far from over. Walter sat in the community center's sunlit room, watching as a group of seniors gathered around laptops and tablets, their faces illuminated by curiosity and determination. The storytelling program he had nurtured was thriving beyond his wildest hopes. What started as a small idea to help a few neighbors capture their memories had grown into a vibrant movement spreading through towns and cities, bridging divides and creating unexpected friendships. The legacy Walter was building was no longer a personal journey, it was a living, breathing force reaching into lives far beyond his own. He remembered the early days when he doubted he had anything left to offer. At 70, worn by loss and uncertainty, Walter had been ready to fade away quietly. But then Elon Musk's words had sparked a fire inside him, and that fire had grown, fueled by community, courage, and a refusal to accept limitations. Now, as the program's success blossomed, Walter felt the weight and wonder of legacy settling in his heart. One afternoon, a letter arrived from a woman named Eleanor, a retired teacher from a small town in Iowa. She wrote that the storytelling program had inspired her to start a similar project at her local library, bringing together seniors and students to share histories and dreams. Eleanor's words were filled with gratitude and hope, a reminder that one spark could ignite countless flames. Walter responded with encouragement, sharing resources and advice, eager to see the network grow. The book compiling stories from participants was nearing completion, and Walter was invited to write the foreword. As he penned his thoughts, he focused not on himself but on the countless voices that had found a platform through the project. "This is our time," he wrote. "A time to listen, to learn, and to leave behind stories that matter. Age is not a barrier but a bridge." Meanwhile, the electric bike initiative that Walter and Leo had championed reached production. Local seniors began using the bikes to regain mobility and confidence, a tangible testament to innovation's power to improve lives. The community center organized test rides and safety workshops, celebrating the triumph of collaboration. Walter's relationship with his family deepened in ways he hadn't imagined possible. Jack and Sam, once distant, were now close allies, inspired by their grandfather's passion and resilience. Family gatherings echoed with laughter and shared dreams, healing wounds of the past. Walter often thought of Liz, imagining how proud she would be to see the life he had rebuilt. As autumn painted the world in warm colors, Walter found himself reflecting on the journey, from despair to purpose, from isolation to connection. He realized that legacy wasn't just about achievements or recognition, it was about the lives touched, the hope kindled, and the courage to begin again. One evening, after a lively storytelling session, Walter stepped outside to find Maya waiting. She smiled, holding a framed photo of the first group that had gathered in the program's earliest days. "Look how far we've come," she said softly. Walter nodded, his eyes misty. "It's more than I ever dreamed." Maya squeezed his hand. "Your legacy is alive, Walter. It's in every story shared, every life changed." That night, Walter wrote in his journal, "I thought I was fading, but I was taking root. Legacy is not about the years behind us but the seeds we plant for those who follow. I am part of something greater now, a movement of hope, connection, and endless possibility." As he closed his journal, Walter felt a deep peace. The journey had been hard, filled with challenges and doubts, but the legacy taking root was proof that transformation was possible at any age. And with that, he looked forward to the days ahead, ready to nurture the future with all the strength and love he had found within himself. Walter woke to the soft morning light filtering through the curtains, a quiet peace settling over him. The journey he had traveled was long and winding, filled with moments of doubt and triumph, loss and love. Yet now, in the autumn of his life, he felt a profound sense of fulfillment. The legacy he had built. The community, the stories, the hope, was more than he had ever imagined. Today was special. Walter had planned a gathering at the community center, a celebration not just of the programs and projects, but of the people who had become family, of the connections that had healed old wounds and forged new paths. As guests arrived, the room buzzed with warmth and excitement. Faces young and old mingled, sharing stories, laughter, and dreams. Walter moved through the crowd, greeted with hugs and smiles, each encounter a reminder of how far he'd come. At the center of the celebration was a surprise, a scholarship fund established in Walter's name to support seniors pursuing new skills and passions. The announcement brought tears to his eyes. This, he realized, was the final gift he could offer, a way to ensure that the spirit of transformation and courage would continue long after he was gone. As the evening progressed, Walter took the stage once more, his heart full. He spoke not of his own journey, but of the power within each person to rewrite their story, to find purpose and joy no matter the age or circumstance. His words were met with applause, but more importantly, with the quiet understanding that change was possible for everyone. After the event, Walter sat with Maya, Leo, Jack, and Sam, feeling the warmth of family and friendship envelop him. They spoke of future plans, of expanding the scholarship, of new projects and dreams yet to be realized. Walter listened, grateful for the energy and hope they carried forward. That night, as he lay in bed, Walter felt a gentle tiredness, a softness that spoke not of defeat but of completion. He reached for his journal, writing one last entry for this chapter of his life. The final gift is not something I give, but something we share, the belief that we matter, that we can change, that our stories live on. I was ready to fade away at 70, but instead, I found a new beginning. And that is the greatest gift of all. With a heart full of peace, Walter closed his eyes, ready to rest but eager for the future he had helped create, knowing that his legacy was alive in every life he touched. Walter woke to the gentle hum of morning light spilling into his room, feeling a calm he hadn't known for years. The celebration, the scholarship, the legacy. It all felt like the closing of one chapter, yet the opening of another, brighter and fuller. The truth he had come to understand was simple yet profound: life didn't end with age, it evolved, expanded, and blossomed in unexpected ways. As he prepared for the day, Walter thought of the countless faces whose lives had intertwined with his own, the seniors who dared to dream again, the young people who found wisdom in stories, the family that had healed and grown stronger. Each was a thread in a tapestry far richer than any solitary journey. At the community center, Walter met with Maya, Leo, Jack, and Sam, their eyes shining with ideas and hope. Together, they planned the next phase of their work, expanding the storytelling network, launching new makerspaces, and deepening the bonds between generations. Walter felt a surge of energy, a reminder that purpose was a well that never ran dry. The afternoon brought a visit from a local school group, eager to hear Walter's story. As he spoke to the bright, curious faces, he realized that the seeds planted by one man's transformation could grow into forests of possibility. A young girl raised her hand, asking, "How did you find the courage to change when you thought it was too late?" Walter smiled, thinking back to the words that had sparked it all, Elon Musk's challenge to defy limits and keep pushing forward. "I stopped listening to the fear and started listening to the possibility," he said. "And I realized that it's never too late to matter." That evening, as Walter sat on his porch watching the stars emerge, he felt the gentle rhythm of life's endless cycle, endings that were beginnings, darkness that birthed light, fear that gave way to courage. He opened his journal one last time and wrote, "I was never too old. I was just waiting for permission to matter again. Now, I give that permission to myself, and to all of you. Our stories are unfinished, our journeys ongoing. The future is ours to create." With a heart full of gratitude and hope, Walter looked out into the night, ready to embrace every new dawn, every new dream, every new beginning. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?